today's video, we're going to be walking through some analysis that we did using mobile telemetry data to try and identify and then track phones belonging to people who had attended the Russia-Africa Summit and Economic Forum, which was hosted in Sochi, Russia in 2019. The mobile telemetry data that we are using for this came from a commercial data provider. Typically, how that provider will get this information is that they'll incentivize developers to include their library when creating mobile apps. Phones will then go and download those apps, and the library will scrape data from the phones, send them back to the data provider who will go on to sell that information. The libraries can collect a range of data. In our use case here, we had access to things like the advertising identification strings that we were able to use to identify each of the specific phones. We also had access to latitude, longitude, reported accuracy measurements, all that came from the phone's GPS, as well as timing data so that we knew when the phone was beaconing from each of these places. Sometimes, depending on your data sources, you will get additional information. This can include a range of things, including maybe the cell carrier, the Wi-Fi access points, MAC addresses, emails, phone number, international mobile equipment and supplier IDs, just all kinds of additional information. For this case study, what we did was we used the latitude and longitude information to do some reverse geocoding using the Synapse Nominatum PowerUp, which allowed us to identify the actual addresses of these places where the phone was beaconing from. So we used this geolocation information as well as the timing of when the phone was beaconing so that we could identify these places that where the phone had been and when it was beaconing from these places, and do some pattern of life analysis and better profile who we thought the phone belonged to. So this allowed us to do things like identify travel that this person had taken this phone on, as well as things like suspected work locations and home locations. So for this project, we started out looking at the Russia-Africa Summit and Economic Forum. So this was something that was hosted back in October 23rd and 24th, 2019. It was co-hosted by President Putin of Russia, as well as President El-Sisi of Egypt. And there's something like 43 different heads of state and heads of government who are in attendance. The focus of this conference was on strengthening economic ties between Russia and African nations, particularly through economic aid. Russia's argument was that they would be willing to provide this aid and have these economic relationships that didn't come with these additional strings attached that say might happen if the African states went and got aid from the US or from China or things like that. So with Russia presenting itself as a country that was going to allow for these states to maintain greater sovereignty. So this was our starting point. We were interested in identifying phones that appeared beaconing from the site of this conference. This conference was hosted at a park called the Serious Science and Technology Park in Sochi. So we focused on phones that were beaconing from that location at the time of the conference, and we found 13 different phones. And I'll go ahead and run this query. So these are the 13 different phones that we found beaconing from the site of the conference during the time frame of the conference. They're each represented here by their advertising ID strings. From here, we want to narrow down which phones would be worth continuing to track. So there was a couple different things that we looked for here. The first was that we needed to make sure that there was enough data for each of those phones. If in some of the phones, there just wasn't enough information that we wouldn't be able to, even if we tried to track them, we wouldn't be able to profile who the phone belonged to. We also took a look at some of the other places that these phones did appear to get a sense of if there were places that looked interesting or places that would help us, had the potential to help us build out a profile for who the phone belonged to. So based on that, we narrowed it down and identified several different phones that we wanted to try and track further. Now, one of the phones that we are going to walk through for this case study showed up in multiple other countries, and it first was showing up in Russia, where we started. And so if I go over to actually geospatial mode here, so in this query, I'm pivoting from the conference itself, the location of the conference, to the phone that we're tracking. So here you can see in this little spot here with the outline of this building, this is where the conference was hosted. And then these green dots here are each of the times that the phone beaconed from that location during the time that the conference was held. So that person was at the building where the conference was, and their phone was beaconing, sending out signals with the geolocation data, the timing, advertising string, things like that. If we take a look at this data, not in geospatial mode, but we switch over to stats mode, and I run this query again, we can get more of a sense of the breakdown of the time that the phone was beaconing. So some of the things that we might immediately look for is to verify that this phone is beaconing on the days that the conference was held. So if we go all the way down to the timeline view, we can see that it was beaconing on the 23rd of October and the 24th, which is, again, the conference dates. And then if we take a look at the hours of the day, one of the things that is worth keeping in mind here is that Sochi is UTC +3 time zone. So the phone is beaconing there from about 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Sochi time, which would be just around the main part of the day, which would let the conference was held. So it's pretty likely that this phone, the person was in attendance at that conference there. In addition to seeing the phone beacon from the site of the conference itself, we also saw the phone beaconing from Sochi International Airport. And if we go back to geospatial, I'll run that query to lift that data. So here's Sochi International Airport. And if I just move this down a little bit, we can see where the phone was beaconing. One of the things that jumps out at me here is that the location of the phone at this point is right near this VIP and government diplomatic terminal. So that kind of adds a little bit more evidence to our hope that this phone might belong to someone who maybe is a diplomat or traveling with the diplomat who had attended that summit. They're certainly at the right terminal there. So one of the things that I would do from here is going back to stats mode to get a closer look at the breakdown of the time that the phone was at that airport. Since there's only like 2 different windows of time really that the phone was there, that might be when they're flying in, flying out. So we can go look down at the timeline to see. So we see the phone beaconed on the 22nd, which is the day before the conference began. So that was probably their arrival. And it looks like the phone beaconed again on the 24th, which was the end of the conference. So that could be the phone leaving. Immediately after the conference, we saw the phone continue to beacon from this time from Azerbaijan. We'll go over to geospatial so I can lift that query. And it was beaconing from the Baku Marriott Hotel Boulevard. These green spots are all the locations where the phone was beaconing from. One of the things that I would want to check here is, again, look at that timing in the stats mode and see if it looks like this phone, when this phone was here and what hours they were here, if it looks like this was somewhere where the person was staying overnight, or if it was somewhere where they just maybe met someone here and then left. So if we switch over to stats mode, we can take a look at what that breakdown looks like. So here we see that Baku is UTC +4 time zone. So here it looks like they're staying here later in the evening, early morning, which would be what we would expect for somebody who is like staying overnight or staying there as opposed to just visiting someone or stopping by. I would also want to look down at the timeline and see the days that the phone appeared. It looked like it was on the 25th. So it was the day after the conference at Sochi ended, and then the 26th. So they were there for 2 days. Another area that we saw a lot of beaconing activity from this phone in this same time window was, if we go back to geospatial, a convention center that was nearby, the Baku Convention Center. If I zoom out a little bit, we can see where this is. So all of these green spots here is where the phone is beaconing. And this again would be something that I would want to go and take a look at the stats mode and see what kind of the breakdown of that activity is. So we see that they're there for several hours. It looks like from about 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Since we're in the UTC +4 time zone. And then we see it was just on the 26th that phone was there. So during the day, maybe for some event or something like that, they're there for several hours. So it's not really just a random stop or a short visit. So from here, I was doing some Googling around to try and figure out if there was an event that was hosted at this convention center at the same time that this phone was here. And one of the things that I found was that there was, or the thing that I found rather, was that there is a conference which I modeled as an OU conference node. And the conference was the 18th summit of heads of state and government of the non-aligned movement. And it took place on the 25th and the 26th, which overlaps with when that phone was there. But just to go ahead and check, I ran a query that is going to pivot from this conference to just show the telemetry that we have from that phone that overlaps with the time that this conference took place at this location. And so I could see that there's 38 nodes, each representing a time that the phone beaconed from this location during the conference. So that gives me some added evidence that the person with this phone probably attended. One of the things that also jumped out at me is that this is another event that a diplomat or someone who works as a diplomat would probably attend. So that kind of adds to the additional evidence that we've seen from everything from attending the first Russia-Africa summit to flying out of the VIP and diplomatic government terminal to now attending this other conference that would be something of interest to a diplomat or somebody who works in kind of a foreign affairs adjacent role. So following the trip to Azerbaijan, we also saw the phone start beaconing from South Africa. And there's a lot of activity that we saw from two places in particular. So the first one is the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. So this is just the organization headquarters here. This is basically South Africa's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we saw a decent amount of activity here from the phone, which I can go add that on to the end of my query. And all of the screen is the phone beaconing. The specific spots are the latitude and longitude measurements that we have from the phone's data. And then this broader green is the reported accuracy measurement, which also came in through the mobile telemetry as well. One of the things to note is that this is one of the locations where we saw the most amount of beaconing activity for this phone. We have 121 nodes in total showing that the phone was beaconing from here. One of the things that I would want to do from here is go back to stats and check to see what kind of timing the phone was beaconing from here. So this is in Pretoria, South Africa, which is UTC +2 time zone. And we can see from looking at the hours of the day that the phone is here from basically from 9 a.m. to around 4 p.m. So that's definitely kind of like the working day that the phone is here. I can also go and check days of the week and see what that breakdown looks like. And it looks like it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, all the way through Friday. I can go and double check to see what the working week is like in South Africa. If I have questions about the Sunday activity that I'm seeing in particular, this could be a case where I decide to query on that. So I can click on the Sunday and then go and query to see those nodes and see more information of that breakdown of like when the phone is actually showing up on Sundays. When I look at the hours, it's just right around noon or so that it looks like the phone is just showing up on about 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And there's only 15 nodes in total. So it's not a huge amount of activity that we saw on Sunday. So it could be more of a one-off. I can also go and I can scroll down to the timeline, and that actually shows me that it was only one day that we saw data from the phone on Sunday. So this could be much more of a one-off than the phone regularly showing up on Sundays here. I can also go back to my other query and get kind of a broader look at the overall beaconing information that we have from that location. One of the things that I would want to look at when looking at the timeline is that if this is a work location, besides seeing activity during working hours in the day and during the work week, is that I would expect that this phone would continue to show up at this location over time. And that is what I see down here. The overall data that we have for this phone is about a 6-month timeframe. And so we notice that the phone, not only is showing up on consecutive days, but is also continuing to return. One of the things that we know about this phone is that this person travels a lot, which can explain a bunch of the gaps, but we're still seeing that they are coming back to this location. So that kind of gives us a little bit more evidence that this probably is a work location. The theme of it as well, that this is basically South Africa's foreign ministry, certainly is in line with the activity that we've seen so far, the Russia-Africa summit, the non-aligned movement summit, the VIP government diplomatic terminal use, things like that. So that's kind of evidence that we're just going to continue to keep in mind as we explore what else we have from this phone in terms of data. There is another location where we saw a ton of activity for this phone. And this was actually a house that I found. I'm just going to show you the house itself first before I show the beaconing information, because otherwise we won't be able to see the house. So this green dot here is the possible home. And then I'm going to go and add on to the end of the query to show all the beaconing information that we have for this phone. So that's the house. And then this is the amount. We'll add another 1,000 more nodes. This is the amount of beaconing activity that we saw just from this house. So there's about 1,500 nodes, which is an extraordinary amount of data, and kind of like considering all the data that we have for this phone, just centered on this one location. So from here, I'd want to go and check out stats mode and see what the breakdown of this looks like. The things that kind of jump out at me here is that looking at the hours of the day breakdown is that this phone shows up all hours of the day, particularly late in the evening, early morning, times that you would expect someone who lives there to be home and probably sleeping. There's a little bit less activity during the day, but that could be easily explained by somebody going out of the house to work or something like that. But overall, we're seeing a fairly consistent presence here throughout all hours of the day. If we go and we toggle that to days of the week, that phone is continuously showing up all the time. It's not like they're only there on Tuesdays and Wednesdays or only there during the work week. They're there every single day of the week. And then if we go and we look at the timeline, similar to what we saw with the suspected work location, is that throughout really the time frame of data that we have for this phone, the phone continues to return to this location. They're there multiple days on end. And we know that the phone does travel, which can explain some of the gaps, but they are returning here and they are here often when they're in the area. So based on especially the stats mode information that we're seeing, it makes me think that that house is probably where the person who owns this phone lives. So I noted that we had a lot of travel information for this phone. We've seen so far the Russia-Africa summit, and then we saw that right after they went to Azerbaijan before returning to South Africa. If we work our way backwards from the Russia-Africa summit, right before they had gone to the Russia-Africa summit, we actually saw this phone beaconing from Iran. It looked like the phone, or the person with the phone, flew into the Imam Khomeini International Airport. We saw some beaconing activity there. And then we also saw some beaconing activity from the Espinasse Hotel, or Palace Hotel, rather. We can go and take a look at that here. So this is the hotel. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And then all that green there is the phone beaconing from that location. One of the things that I would want to do here is take a look at stats mode to see that breakdown at the time. So they're there on a Wednesday or Thursday, but we can check the hours of the day. And it looks like they were there later in the evening through early morning. And then Tehran is the UTC +3 time zone. So it looks like they came back around 1 p.m., maybe for lunch or something like that. They're there very briefly. But this suggests to me that this is a place where they're staying rather than a place where they went to attend like an event for the day, but then they're staying elsewhere. If we go and scroll down to the timeline, we can see that this activity was on the 15th of October and then the 16th of October. So they were there 2 days. We saw a little bit of beaconing activity. One node really that was also right outside Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This building here with kind of the reddish roof is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is the phone beaconing right outside. Because this is only one node, it's not enough to tell us whether the phone went in or anything like that. We just know that they were in the area. So this is something that we can keep in mind with the other data that we've seen that suggests that this probably belongs to Diplomat, given our suspected workplace and given the other events that we've seen this phone appear at. But from this node itself, we just know that they were outside at some point. We don't know that they met with anyone there or they ever even went inside. But one of the things that I did, given that I now have a suspected work location that I think that this person works for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, was I went to their website and I was checking some of the press releases and some of the statements and the meeting notes and things that they had from 2019, which is when we had this data for this phone. And I noticed that they had several news reports where they were reporting on travel or events that their diplomats had gone on. And one of the things that they noted was that South Africa's foreign minister was set to travel to the Middle East. And this is actually the article that they had written. Minister Pandor to undertake a working visit to the Middle East from 15 to 16 October 2019. October 15th and 16th was the same dates that we saw this phone beaconing from Tehran. And one of the things that I went ahead and did was within the article itself is they noted that she would be attending the ministerial session of the 14th South Africa-Iran Joint Commission or Cooperation. And she's also meeting her Iranian counterpart there. Now, if I remember correctly, and checking on this note, I can see that I do, they didn't list a location for this meeting, so I don't know, I didn't have anywhere to look to see if there was, if the phone was beaconing from the same location of this meeting. There also was limited information for the phone in Iran. It wasn't beaconing from some additional place that suggested, based on the timing and the location, that that might have been the site of the conference. So I'm just kind of left with, the phone was definitely within the same city. It was within the country at the time. It seems like the phone belongs to someone who works there. So I suspect that the phone was here related to this conference, but I don't know if the person actually attended because I don't know where it was. So that's something that we're kind of left just with the data we have, which in this case is rather limited. So continuing to work backwards, we also saw just prior to appearing in Tehran, we also saw that the phone appeared in Doha. They were at the Doha Sheraton. And we can go and take a look at where that is on geospatial mode. So this hotel here is the Doha Sheraton. It is actually the Sheraton Grand Doha Hotel, which is here. And then we see the phone beaconing from this location. We switch over to stats mode to see the breakdown of what that looks like. They're there actually pretty much all the time. So it looks like this is probably where they were staying, or possibly also where an event was hosted. I'm not sure, although there's also the possibility that in this case, since it's so consistent over time, that maybe the person left their phone there and the event was elsewhere. We don't really know. But the phone spent a lot of time at the specific hotel. So scrolling down to the timeline, we can see that they were there from the 11th of October through to the 15th of October, at which point we know from the 15th, they appeared at the Iranian airport and then went on to go to the 16th. They were also in Tehran. We also noticed that this phone did beacon once from outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which we can go take a look at that. This is very similar to the phone beaconing. Here's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs building here. Here's the phone beaconing here. This is very similar to when the phone beaconed right outside of Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We're dealing with a single node. We don't know if the person went inside. We just know that at some point the phone beaconed from here. So it's something that we can keep in mind because it definitely fits with the foreign affairs theme that we're continuing to see with this phone, but we can't really say specifically what this phone or what this person was doing outside of just saying that the phone at some point beaconed here. But I checked the calendar again to see what the Department of International Relations and Cooperation had scheduled for this time, and just checking to see what kind of press releases they released. And I noted that they actually spoke about a specific meeting. It was rather informal compared to the conferences and summits that they'd written about before, but they noted that Minister Pandor was going to be attending a bilateral meeting with her counterpart in Qatar, and this was going to be hosted on the 15th. This again was a meeting where they didn't give any indication of where it was hosted. So I don't know necessarily if, because of all of the beaconing information that we saw from that one hotel, if that happened to be in the same hotel, or if it was a case where it was hosted elsewhere and the person with the phone either didn't go or attended but didn't bring their phone. This is just kind of the information that we have at the moment that's a little bit inconclusive. So continuing to work backwards, prior to going to Qatar, we did see the phone beaconing from Japan as well. In this case, it was beaconing from 2 different locations. And we'll go ahead and switch this to geospatial and show the first one. So the first one is this building here, which is a hotel and also a conference center. And if we take a look over at the stats mode for this breakdown, we see that they're there kind of later in the day, but then just a tiny bit. Japan is UTC +9 time zone. So this would equate from about 3 p.m. to 9 a.m. and then briefly again at around 4 to 5 p.m. If we take a look at the timeline breakdown, we see that it's on the 22nd now of August and the 24th of August. However, due to the time zone, the 22nd might be like very, very late on the 22nd, which would actually be the 23rd in the UTC +9 time zone. That's something to kind of keep in mind, that difference there. We also saw additional beaconing activity from another hotel that was nearby. If we switch to geospatial, I can show that. This Royal Park Hotel, which is this tower here, the beaconing activity is with that green. And if I move this over, we can actually see this is the first hotel and conference center where we had seen the phone beaconing. And then it came over here. One of the things that I think is happening based on the stats output that we saw for this. So for the second hotel, we see that they're there much more throughout the day, especially like what would have been like later evening and things like that. So it seems like they're staying there. And then we also see that they're there from the 26th to the 30th. So how I interpreted that is I think the person with the phone stayed at that first hotel when they first arrived, and then they moved to the second hotel and were staying there for the next few days. There was a limited other information or beaconing information from the phone while in Japan. I saw the phone beacon briefly from the airport on the 31st, which I think is the phone leaving, given that we last saw it at this hotel on the 30th. But besides the airport, there was kind of a limited data from where this phone was. I checked again to see what sort of events might have been hosted in this area at the time. And I did see that there was this conference that the Department of International Relations and Cooperation reported on. It was the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development. It was hosted the 28th to the 30th, which is the same time frame that that phone was there. One of the things that is worth noting is that this conference was hosted at a conference center that actually take a look at this in geospatial. If we spell it correctly, we can take a look at it in geospatial. We'll switch over into geospatial. So the conference center where this conference was hosted is actually within the same building where that first hotel is, where the phone initially stayed. So at the time of the conference, though, we saw a lot of beaconing information from the phone at the other hotel. So this could tell us that maybe the person never attended this conference. They were definitely in the area and they left as soon as the conference ended, but maybe they never attended, or it could even be as simple as something where the person left their phone in the hotel and went without it. One of the things I was also considering is that, since this phone seems to be traveling to a lot of the places where Minister Pandor was set to make appearances or set to attend, this could belong to a staffer who maybe in some cases is not going to necessarily have to be at present in all of these summits or present in all of these conferences. Their attendance isn't necessarily required, but they're still playing a supporting role, and so going to these locations with the Prime Minister. That could be something that might be going on as well. But we'll continue looking at the rest of the data that we have for this phone and see if there's anything that kind of gives us a better sense of who this belongs to. So continuing to work backwards, prior to arriving in Japan, We did also see beaconing activity in Tanzania. The phone, or the person with the phone rather, flew into the Julius Nyerere International Airport. And again, we see the phone beaconing from this VIP terminal over here. And then we also saw the phone appear at the Julius Nyerere Convention Center, which is this building right here. So one of the things that we can do here is go to check out geospatial again, look at the actual breakdown of the time that they appear to be at the convention center. So Tanzania is the UTC plus 3 time zone. So the times that we see the phone beaconing from there throughout the day is about 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. or so, which would be definitely like the work day of that in that time zone. If we take a look at the overall timeline, we can see that they were there from the 10th and 11th of August, and then again from the 17th to 18th of August. If we want to see an actual breakdown of what the days of the week are, it looks like they were there briefly on a Sunday and then on a Saturday. So that gives us a little bit more information. Besides seeing activity from the convention center, I also wanted to go and check to see what might have been there at that time. So one of the things that I actually found was that there was another conference, which we can see here. It was the 39th Ordinary Summit of the Heads of State and Government of the Southern Africa Development Community. This took place on the 17th and 18th, which is overlaps with the beaconing dates that we saw from that phone. This was also something where the Department of International Relations and Cooperation reported as Minister Pandor having attended. They wrote, Minister Pandor arrives in Tanzania to lead South Africa's delegation at this meeting. So one of the things that I could also do is just specifically check to see if the beaconing information that we see from the phone lines up with the time that the phone or the time that the conference was hosted at that specific location. So if I just wanted to do a kind of a final check, I can run that query, pivoting from the place to the conference, grabbing the start and end dates and pivoting to the telemetry for that phone and filtering by the time, the start and end time for that conference. And there's 11 nodes, so 11 different times that phone beaconed from this location at the time that the conference took place. So that also kind of suggests that the person was in attendance there. In addition to seeing the activity from the convention center and the airport, I also saw some activity from a hotel nearby, which I think it could be where someone was staying. So this is the Southern Sun Hotel in Dar es Salaam, and it's right across the street from the convention center. And one of the things that I would do here is go take a look at stats mode and see the breakdown of the times. Now, whereas some of the hotels where we had seen this phone beacon from before, it looked like they were staying overnight, or they were definitely staying there based on the beaconing activity from late evening through early morning in that time zone. In this case, we're just seeing kind of two different windows of time in which the phone is beaconing. Now, Tanzania is the UTC plus 3 time zone, so we're looking at about the phone beaconing from there 8 to 9 a.m. and again at 8 to 10 p.m. rather. So this could be that they're meeting with someone in the morning or picking someone up, dropping them off, something like that. But this also would be a case where it seems like there's not quite enough information for me to conclusively think that the person with the phone is staying there unless maybe they're turning their phone off. And so it's not beaconing at all. And we just have these two little windows. But going down to the timeline view, we do say that they're consecutive days from the 9th through the 10th through the 11th. So they are appearing there several days in a row. So based on the data that we have for this phone, I think it's likely that this phone belongs to someone who attended the Russia-Africa Summit in Sochi. We saw beaconing from that location at the time of the summit, at the place where the summit was hosted. We think that also the phone belongs to someone who works for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa, based on the amount of beaconing activity over time, the returning to that same location, the beaconing during the work week and during the work day, from that specific site. And then it also is very much fits the theme of a lot of these different conferences where we saw this phone also make an appearance. I think that the phone probably belongs, we also identified where we think that the person who owns the phone probably lives based on the 15,000 nodes beaconing from that one house. And the time frame showing that it's beaconing like all hours of the day, especially late evening, early morning in that time zone. They continue to return. They're showing up day after day, consecutive days. They're there every day of the week. I think the phone probably belongs to someone who works with the foreign minister, but is not the foreign minister herself. They appear to be doing a lot of travel to the same events where she was in attendance. However, there were several big ticket items or actually I can show you the events that I modeled where we saw this phone in attendance. So there are several different events where we saw this phone. A bunch of them were bigger conferences. However, we also saw this phone beaconing from the same country, the same city at the same time as a smaller bilateral meeting. However, I don't think that this phone belongs to Minister Pandor herself based on several big ticket trips that we know that she went on. Based on reporting. These are things like the UN General Assembly where she led South Africa's delegation. And there's also another event in France where she attended. And during those two times, not only did we not see the phone beaconing from either the US or from France, but the phone was actually beaconing from South Africa and also from Japan at those times. The person was elsewhere. So it could be that this person is maybe an aide or somebody who is in a supporting role, doesn't go everywhere with her, but is traveling frequently to a bunch of these places. My next step probably from here would be to try and figure out if I can identify the people who live at that home that we think is the home location. Ideally, I would be able to get the names of the people who live there and then be able to somehow get names of the people who work for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and hopefully use those two to identify who this phone looks like it actually belongs to.